So, how was your week? We measure life in weeks, so we should ask. Mine was a real Forrest Gump week. You know, you never know what you're going to get. It was chiefly shifted by something that happened earlier in the week. An art prize entry we have that got a lot of attention prompted someone to comment on it by putting something on our front wall that was expressive of dissent. I'll talk a little more about that later, but that added to a week that already had plenty in it. Someone in our church community died, and not the person I expected. And I'm still sorting my stuff at home, going through the photographs, trying to put them in order. I'm making progress, but it takes almost as long to put the photographs in order as it does to take them. I think I'll have to have 2 more children just so I can get it right. Of course, I haven't told my wife that. I might get some dissent. And then there's Congress. Pray that amid the clamor of our times, I find a place where truth can perch and sing this day. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. Well, as I mentioned, we're at the end of a season of festivals in the Jewish tradition, that of Simchat Torah. And we've used all of these weeks as a way to celebrate parts of our lives as well, lifting up our different ministries every Sunday in the social hall. Now, I've got to tell you that we do it differently than they do, meaning Jews. We're not Jews after all. But I want to tell you about my Simchat Torah experience, which obviously took place before I came here. It took place in Brooklyn, and I happened to be walking home one Simchat Torah evening. The sun was just going down. I was walking down a street alongside the local Orthodox synagogue. The rabbi and I were nodding acquaintances. Knew his wife by waving to her, and she waved back. It was a very pleasant, if respectful, distance. And it was Simchat Torah, and so the doors opened as I'm walking down the street, and men, especially men, but women too, came pouring into the street. They were singing. There was music. They had Torah scrolls in their arms. They were dancing, and they were drunk, which is a requirement of the occasion. In Jewish tradition, one is supposed to get tipsy at least twice a year for Simchat Torah and for Purim. And so as I'm walking down the street, Rabbi Raskin says, "Fred, come here!" And before I knew it, I had a shot glass in my face and an arm around my shoulder. And inside of 3 minutes, I'm doing Zorba dancing down the streets of Brooklyn, back and forth, feeling very silly indeed. Almost as silly as when I do video minutes for Fountain Street Church. And it occurs to me that we don't do that around here, do we? There's not a Sunday in which we dance around and get drunk. We might get drunk, but not in church. We might dance, but not here. We should wonder why. We should. But here at Fountain Street Church, we celebrate it in our own wise, correct, poised, dignified, middle-class, white way. I think we should look into a little drunken dancing from time to time. Our celebrations were all cerebral. 4 sermons, of which this is the last. Let me review them for you, because I'm going to comment on all of them in the next few moments, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Back on September 8th, I told us, or reminded us really, that we only have one belief. It doesn't attach to whether gods exist, or whether Jesus was God, or whether the Bible is true. It's a much more basic belief, one that everyone has, but we never notice. The belief that everyone belongs. Not just to our church, in the sense that we open our hearts and try to be open to everyone, but everyone that exists deserves to be on the planet, deserves honor, respect, and care. And that we ought to be working for a world to make that happen, which was my next sermon, which is, it's good to believe in good things like that, but if you're not doing anything, you're not holding up your end of the bargain. We have a duty not just to believe it, but to live it. And of course, it's hard for us to talk about duty because, as I have often said, the liberal church is sometimes experienced as the church of "you're not the boss of me"ism. And we have to get over that. We're grown-ups here. This is not a place to be 14 forever. We have duties, and the principal duty is to make the world as good as we think it should be. But then I went on the last week and said, that sounds simple, and it is, but it's terribly hard. There are no clear rules. You can't open up a book, any book, and get distinct rules. People say, well, I just follow the Bible. I said, do you really? Take a good look, because there are rules that go to the left and to the right, up and down. It's hard to follow the Bible. Well, I picked the right ones. Well, how do you know they're the right ones? And you know how complex it is. So we know this golden rule thing applies. We just know it's really hard to do on a steady basis. This week I'm going to sketch out how this congregation and others like us try to help us live into that conviction that everyone belongs. You don't know Jeffrey Olson, and I don't either, but I read about his story. He was an Anglican priest in Canada, where Episcopalians are called Anglicans. And back in 2006, he was feeling uneasy with the way his church was treating Indigenous people in Canada, the First Nations. So he went to his bishop, and his bishop said, I think you're having a crisis of faith here. You should take a leave of absence and go do some reflecting, which he did, at which point he says, during the break, I had plenty of time to think. I explored philosophy, science, epistemology, and finally, I read a book called The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. I will never forget how it awakened my mind and how it stirred a deep curiosity within me. I started to see that my model of the world was not working. I think that's a story some of you have lived, haven't you? You may have been raised in a different religious community, and it all made sense, but then little discrepancies began to show up. They might have been factual discrepancies, science class and the Bible. They weren't working out. Or, just as typically, being told to do this on Sunday and then watching the people who told you do exactly the opposite on Monday. The discrepancies piled up to a point where it no longer worked, as they didn't work for Jeffrey Olson. It's a hard moment, isn't it? A great disappointment. But it's also a moment of liberation, and that's often the story I hear when people join our congregation and others. They kind of invert the evangelical hymn, I once was found, but now I'm lost. And I'm okay with that. For the first time in their lives, they might feel a sense of freedom they never had before, to be able to think without being told it's the wrong thing to think, to go wandering off into worlds of thought. And free minds are what liberal religion needs and wants. We want everyone here to be here because they want to be and desire to be, because it helps them to cultivate that freedom of mind, even if it means letting go of cherished notions that churches have depended on for generations. We're willing to put it all on the block if you can be honest and you can thrive in that. Now, when conventional churches get all up in themselves, they sometimes criticize churches like us for accepting atheists and agnostics as equals. Of course, we should reply, let's remember they turned into atheists and agnostics while they were in your pews. Liberal religion doesn't care what you think as long as you do think. And our mission is not to tell you what's true, but to help you find the truth to give you that capacity to think, because even the Gospels remind us that you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. We are not, of course, equipped. Well, some of us in the room are equipped. I'm looking down at Professor Eberly, notably, to teach philosophy or science or epistemology, a word I'm sure you use on a daily basis. What we can teach here, what we should and what we do teach, is something called religious literacy. Professor Stephen Prothero wrote a book of that title when he documented the widespread ignorance people have of religion, not just of other religions, often their very own, and that this was a problem. Well, the people at Harvard University in 2011 decided to start a project to address that because, as they wrote, one of the most troubling and urgent consequences of this illiteracy is that it often fuels prejudice and antagonism. But it is possible to diminish religious literacy by teaching about religion from a non-sectarian perspective. Honest information about what religions say and what they do is how we free our minds, how we choose for ourselves. We tend to think of religious education as like sex education. Ignorance is not bliss. It will only get you into trouble. But of course, once you are free and can make up your own mind about religion, what are you going to do with that freedom? Well, we don't just want you to know, we want you to live. And here comes my next story. The man found me at the piano in the choir room maybe 2 or 3 years ago. He was new to the church, but also to church itself. He didn't grow up with a consistent background. That's very common. Now, he didn't have a religious childhood, so he didn't know the drill, or as he put it to me, what's expected of us here? And I hemmed and hawed before coming up with an answer, because our culture of not forcing people kept me from actually putting expectations out there.